This summer, a movie called Michael made $850 million in just 5 weeks. 5 weeks. His own son played him. The Jackson estate approved every scene. People in 60 countries cried. At the premiere, there was a standing ovation for 4 full minutes. 4 minutes. And the king of pop was back. And then Netflix dropped something else. Same month. Same name on every screen. A 3-part documentary about a 13-year-old boy named Gavin. About what happened to him at a ranch in the mountains of California, Neverland, a 2,700-acre estate built for one purpose: to bring children inside. A carousel, a zoo, a Ferris wheel, a private cinema, a train that circled the whole property, everything a child could dream of. And on the stairs going up to his private bedroom, alarms on every single step, so he could hear if someone was coming. A 12-year-old boy tried to tell the world what was happening behind those doors. That was 1993. The question was buried. Today, it's back. This episode covers child sexual abuse allegations, grooming, and trial proceedings involving a minor. Please take care of yourself and pause whenever you need to. All right, let's go. I want to start in 1988, not with the crime, with a purchase. Michael Jackson pays $17 million for 2,700 acres in Santa Ynez Valley, California. And then he spends the next few years turning it into something that shouldn't exist. A carousel, a Ferris wheel visible from a mile out. A petting zoo, giraffes, llamas, a 60-foot python, and a chimpanzee named Bubbles who wore matching outfits with Jackson. A movie theater with commercial-grade popcorn, an arcade, a swimming pool, bumper cars, a real functioning train that circled the whole property. He named it Neverland, after Peter Pan, after the boy who flies children away from ordinary life to a place where nobody has to grow up. Ask yourself something. Why does one adult, a single man with no children of his own, build a theme park? The answer Jackson gave in every interview was simple. He never had a childhood. His father took it. He was performing at 5, touring before he could drive, and Neverland was how he got it back. People believed that. Not just believed it, they found it beautiful. Because Michael Jackson wasn't a person to most of the world. He was something else entirely. Thriller is still the best-selling album in history. The 1983 moonwalk made people in the studio literally fall out of their chairs. He had this quality, something that felt outside the normal rules of what a human being could be. And when someone like that builds a theme park and fills it with children, when he says on camera that sharing his bed with kids is the most loving thing you can do, the world says, that's just Michael. That sentence, 3 words, just Michael being Michael. That sentence is the whole story. After was allowed to happen. Jordan Chandler is 12 years old. He lives with his mother June and her husband David Schwartz in Los Angeles. His parents are divorced. His dad Evan has limited custody, runs a dental practice in Beverly Hills, writes screenplays on the side. One of them became Robin Hood, Men in Tights. David Schwartz had a car rental company. And through a car rental, the most ordinary transaction in the world, Jordan's family ended up in Michael Jackson's orbit. Jackson started calling Jordan directly. Personal calls that went on for hours. Attention that made a 12-year-old feel like the center of the universe. By early 1993, Jordan was staying at Neverland. Weekends, then longer. Trips to Las Vegas, to Monaco. His mother June came along often. She was, by multiple accounts, completely won over. Jackson sent her gifts, covered expenses, made the whole family feel chosen. Jordan's dad Evan started getting uneasy, not because he knew anything specific. Something just felt wrong in a way he couldn't put words to. In June 1993, during Evan's scheduled custody time, Jordan told him what he says happened. He then told a psychiatrist. By law, the psychiatrist had to report it. The Los Angeles Police Department opened a criminal investigation in July 1993. August, the story went public. The world split immediately. Half believed the boy, half called it a setup, a greedy father trying to shake down the most famous person alive. And the media in 1993, remember, this is before the internet changed everything. The media ran with the setup narrative. Because Michael Jackson was commercially valuable. To his label, to publications that depended on his access, to an entire industry that had financial reasons to protect him. Jackson denied everything. Went on MTV, cried, said he would never hurt a child. January 1994, the civil lawsuit was settled, approximately $15 to $20 million, paid to Jordan's family. No trial, no criminal charges, not an admission of guilt. Jackson's lawyers were very clear about that. The investigation continued briefly, but Jordan chose not to cooperate, and in September 1994 it was closed with nothing filed. Jordan Chandler changed his name. He has never spoken publicly about what he says happened to him. He's in his mid-40s now, somewhere, living quietly. He was 12 when he told that psychiatrist. Now here's what that settlement actually communicated, not on paper, but in practice. It said, if you accuse Michael Jackson, you will be called a liar. Your family will be dragged through the press, and eventually money will be offered to make it stop. Then you will disappear. That message went out in January 1994, and for 9 years it held. February
House.
2003, a
Her
BBC
house
journalist
and
named
Beverly
Martin
Hills
Bashir
house too.
airs a documentary he spent 8 months making. He'd gotten access nobody had gotten before. Filmed everything. Jackson shopping, spending $6 million in an afternoon. Jackson at home. Jackson talking. And there is one moment in that documentary that changes everything. Bashir is sitting with Jackson. Jackson is sitting next to a boy. The boy is 13 years old. His name is Gavin Arvizo. Their fingers are intertwined. Jackson is holding this child's hand on national television. And Bashir asks whether it's appropriate for a grown man to share his bed with children who aren't his. Jackson looks at him and says, it's the most loving thing you can do. Sharing your bed with someone you love. It's not sexual. The world needs more of that. 27 million people watched that, and most of them kept scrolling.
The most loving thing to do is to share your bed with someone. You know?
You really think that?
Yeah.
Now let me tell you who Gavin Arvizo actually was. Not the case number. Not the accuser, Gavin. He grew up in East Los Angeles. Working class family, tight on money, parents in a difficult marriage. He was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at 9 years old. 9. Chemotherapy. A disease trying to take his life before it had really started. And Gavin's response, instead of shutting down, was to refuse. He found comedy. He connected with the Laugh Factory, a club in LA that ran programs for sick kids, kids who were struggling, kids who needed to be reminded that funny still existed. And that's how Jackson found him. Someone at the Laugh Factory mentioned a famous donor who loved their work, who wanted to meet Gavin, a 10-year-old fighting cancer. His idol wants to meet him. You don't say no to that. You shouldn't have to. 2000. Gavin meets Jackson for the first time, and from every account, Jackson was extraordinary with him. Attentive in a way Gavin had probably never experienced. Called him personally, sent things. Video games, clothes, things the family couldn't afford. Covered medical bills. For Gavin, this man wasn't a celebrity. He was closer to a miracle, and by 2001, Gavin was spending weekends at Neverland. Then longer. Jackson called him Little Man. Gavin called Jackson his best friend. Gavin was 10. Jackson was 42. I know what you're thinking, because I thought it too. From the outside, that sentence sounds alarming. A 42-year-old man and his best friend is a 10-year-old with cancer. But from inside that world, inside the warmth of that attention, inside Neverland with the animals and the rides, and a man who treated your sick child like he was precious, it didn't feel alarming. It felt like love. That's the thing about grooming that people misunderstand. It doesn't knock on your door wearing a mask. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives looking exactly like the most beautiful, generous thing that's ever happened to your family. And the child who's being groomed, they have real feelings, real attachment, real love. The affection is genuine. The connection is real. That's what makes it work. Because when something eventually crosses a line, when something happens that the child knows is wrong, there's this enormous thing they're being asked to destroy by telling someone, an identity, a friendship, something that felt like the best part of their life. So they protect it. We're going to come back to that. Because two men named Wade Robson and James Safechuck are going to show you, decades later, exactly what that silence costs. November 2003, the Santa Barbara DA's office had been watching Jackson since 1993. They knew about Jordan. They knew about the settlement. And now here was Jackson on national television, holding a child's hand, defending sharing his bed with kids. They called Gavin in. Gavin told them everything. He said Jackson gave him alcohol, wine in a Diet Coke can so it wouldn't look like wine. He said Jackson showed him pornography from a locked briefcase. He said Jackson sexually abused him. He was 13 years old sitting across from detectives, saying these things. Let that sit. November 19, 2003. The production company behind the Bashir documentary handed investigators raw footage that hadn't aired. 4 days later, 70 officers executed a search warrant on Neverland Ranch. They found a briefcase, locked pornographic magazines inside. Prosecutor Ron Zonin, who spent years on this case and who you can now hear on the Netflix documentary, says on camera, "Yes, we found the briefcase. Yes, it was the same color Gavin described. Yes, it had pornography in it." Gavin described that briefcase before the police ever searched, before they opened it. December 2003, Jackson was arrested. He posted bail, walked outside, and moonwalked on the roof of his SUV for the fans who had gathered. He moonwalked. January 2005, the trial. No cameras allowed is inside, judge's order. Reporters outside every day, fans in sleeping bags. People in Jackson costumes. Helicopters, a circus, 14 weeks, 60 days, more than 130 witnesses. Gavin testified. His brother Starr testified. Starr was present for some of what allegedly happened, saw some of it himself. The prosecution wanted to tell the jury about 1993, about Jordan, about the settlement, about a pattern. The judge said no. Prior allegations would prejudice the jury. So 12 people decided Michael Jackson's fate without knowing that a previous accuser had been paid approximately $20 million to go away. They decided in a vacuum. Jackson's defense attorney was Tom Messero, one of the sharpest criminal defense lawyers in the country. He went after the Arvizo family's credibility with surgical precision. And he wasn't wrong that there were problems. Gavin's mother Janet had made inconsistent statements in other contexts. There were gaps in the family's timeline, legitimate questions. Then Messero brought in Macaulay Culkin, Home Alone, Kevin McAllister, now in his mid-20s, taking the stand and testifying that he'd spent time with Jackson as a child. Slept in his room, traveled with him. Nothing inappropriate had ever happened. Think about what that does to a jury. A recognizable face, someone they trust, saying, "I was there. I had the same access, and my experience was different." Jackson himself didn't testify. He submitted a video statement. He looked at the camera and said, "I haven't been betrayed or deceived by children. Adults have let me down. Adults have let me down." The jury deliberated for 32 hours over 7 days. June 13, 2005, not guilty. All 14 counts. The fans screamed. White doves got released. Jackson raised his fist and thanked the world. Gavin Arvizo went home. He was 15. Let me slow down here, because the verdict is not what I want to talk about. I understand how it happened. The jury followed the law. They evaluated what they were permitted to see. What I want to talk about is how a person becomes who Michael Jackson allegedly was. Because that question, the why, is the one that never gets answered. Michael Joseph Jackson grew up in Gary, Indiana, the 5th of 9 kids. His father, Joe, was a steelworker who saw his son's talent and decided it was a business. Michael was performing at 5 years old, on stage, in front of crowds, doing James Brown moves before he started school. Joe Jackson was not gentle about it. The brothers have described being hit, threatened, controlled. Michael was called Big Nose by his own father. Rehearsals ran with the threat of physical punishment as background music. He said it his whole life. "I never had a childhood, not as a metaphor, as a fact, a real, specific thing that was taken from him before he understood what it was. And so he built Neverland, and he filled it with children, and he told the world it was love." Here's what I think, and I want to be clear, this is not an excuse, it is not a defense. Nothing I'm about to say changes what those boys allegedly experienced. But I genuinely believe Michael Jackson thought it was love. That's the most disturbing part of this whole thing. A predator who knows what he is, that person you can name. You can fight, you can stop. But a predator who has convinced himself that what he's doing is care, who experiences every accusation as a betrayal, who genuinely cannot distinguish between love and harm, that person keeps going. Because in their own mind, there is nothing to stop, and everyone around him let it happen. He didn't operate alone. Managers, lawyers, publicists, a record label, a security team, an entire ecosystem of adults who were paid very, very well to make his life run. Some of those people saw things. The Netflix documentary puts them on camera. His former publicist, his security director, Martin Bashir, reflecting on what he filmed. Former employees who testified at the 2005 trial about what they witnessed at the ranch. And what comes through, even between the lines, even in what's left unsaid, is a machine built around protecting one man. Non-disclosure agreements signed before anyone could speak. staff who kept their jobs by staying quiet, lawyers who could bury anything. This is the same story as Harvey Weinstein, as R. Kelly. Every time a predator operates with this much money and this much fame, there's a whole system of people whose financial interests align with not asking hard questions. And the 1993 settlement made sure everyone knew the math. Pay enough, and accusers vanish. I need to tell you about Wade Robson and James Safechuck. If you watched Leaving Neverland, the 2019 HBO documentary, you know these names. But I need you to understand something specific about them. In 2005, at the criminal trial, both of them testified for the defense, under oath, in front of a jury. They said nothing inappropriate had ever happened to them. Wade Robson was especially important to Messereau's case, composed, credible, saying he'd known Jackson since he was 7 years old and nothing was wrong. Then in 2013, 8 years after the verdict, Wade Robson had a complete breakdown. He came forward and said he had been lying, that the abuse began when he was 7, that Jackson had spent years telling him, "If you ever say anything, we both go to prison." That he had protected Jackson not just from fear, but because the grooming was so total, so woven into who he was, that protecting Jackson felt like protecting something inside himself. To call it abuse meant calling it abuse when he was 7 years old, when he loved that man, when that man was the most important relationship in his life. You don't do that easily. You sometimes don't do that for 30 years. James Safechuck came forward in 2016. Similar account. Years of silence. Years of belief in a story Jackson had built around him. Safechuck has a son now. He said in an interview that when his son reached the age Safechuck was when the alleged abuse began, he couldn't function. Just sat there looking at his child. "This is how small I was." Both men filed lawsuits against the Jackson estate. In 2024, a California court allowed those cases to proceed. They're still ongoing. Here's what the Netflix documentary does differently from everything before it. It goes inside the 2005 trial, not just the verdict, the machinery. And it puts the right people on camera, actual jurors. People who sat in that courtroom for 14 weeks and came back with not guilty on all 14 counts. One of them says, and this is in the documentary, that they made the decision the law required, that they evaluated the evidence they were given, that they stand behind the process. And then they say, if they had known about prior allegations, about a previous accuser, about a settlement that made a child disappear, the deliberations might have looked different. Prosecutor Ron Zonin sits in front of the camera. He spent years building this case. He believed Gavin Arvizo then. He still does. You can see it. Martin Bashir reflects on that moment. Jackson and Gavin, the intertwined hands, the 27 million viewers. What you see in that footage, he says, is a grown man describing behavior with a child that no person in any position of authority, no teacher, no doctor, no parent, would accept. He knew what he was filming. He aired it anyway, and the world called it just Michael being Michael. Jackson died on June 25, 2009. He was 50. Propofol overdose, administered by his personal physician Conrad Murray, who was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. Jackson was in rehearsals for a 50-show comeback tour at the O2 in London. Tickets had sold out in 4 hours. He never answered for what Gavin alleged. Never stood in a courtroom over what Robson and Safechuck say started when they were children. He died with his acquittal intact, with his music on every platform, with his legacy in the hands of an estate worth over $600 million. The biopic just made $850 million. And Jordan Chandler, who changed his name in 1994 and has never spoken publicly, is somewhere in his mid-40s, living quietly. Whatever he carries from those months with Michael Jackson, he carries it without us knowing. He was 12. Gavin Arvizo is in his mid-30s now. No interviews, no statements. Both of them chose silence. I've thought about that a lot. They spoke. They were called liars. They were dragged through press coverage and courtrooms and public opinion. And they came out the other side and decided that invisible was the only safe thing to be. That's not giving up. That might be the only rational response to what they were put through. Here's the thing I can't shake about this case. Not the verdict. I understand the verdict. Reasonable doubt exists for a reason, and the jury did what they were supposed to do with what they were allowed to see. What I can't shake is everything before the verdict. 1988, a man builds a theme park for children, and the world calls it charming. 1993, a 12-year-old describes what he says happened to him, and the world calls his father a grifter. 1994, a settlement buries the case, and the world moves on. 2003, a man holds a child's hand on national television and says there's nothing wrong with sharing a bed with children, and 27 million people watch it and go about their day. At every single turn, the world chose the easier story. The easier story let people keep enjoying the music. It meant nobody had to look at the alarm on those stairs, on every single step leading to his private bedroom so he would hear anyone coming. Nobody had to ask who built that. Nobody had to ask why. The harder story was right there. Every time. I watched the Netflix documentary the night it came out, and I keep coming back to the contrast more than anything else in it. Two things in the same month, same name everywhere, $850 million movie. Approved by the estate, ends with the moonwalk and the legacy in the music, and a 3-part documentary about a 13-year-old boy. Most people who cried at the biopic will never watch the documentary. Most people who watch the documentary have already decided what they think. The audiences barely overlap. That's how it's always worked with Michael Jackson. You get to choose which story you live in. Gavin doesn't get to choose. He has to live in a world where both exist at the same time, where the man who allegedly did what Gavin says he did is also the subject of an $850 million celebration that his own family made. He doesn't get to opt out of that. I've been sitting with this for a long time. I don't know what Gavin's life looks like now, whether he's okay, whether it's gotten easier, or whether some things just don't. I know he was a 10-year-old kid who had cancer and refused to stop laughing. I know the most famous person alive looked at that child and decided to make him feel chosen. I know a briefcase was found exactly where that child said it would be. I know 2 men who protected Jackson under oath for decades, who had nothing financial to gain from coming forward, eventually came forward anyway and said, "This is what happened to us." I know at least one juror now wonders about the evidence they weren't shown. I don't know what all of that adds up to for you. For me, I just keep coming back to one thing. Gavin Arvizo deserved better. Every single adult who looked at a 42-year-old man calling a sick 10-year-old his best friend, every manager, every lawyer, every journalist, every person who signed an NDA and drove home, they all had a chance to say something. None of them did. He was just a kid who wanted to survive his cancer. He was 10 years old. Stay safe.